Welcome, everybody. So today I am talking to Wendy Behary. Behary? I should have asked you beforehand how you say your last name.
Either one is fine, actually.
Oh, you're so accommodating. Um, she is a licensed clinical social worker and the founder and director of the Cognitive Therapy Center of New Jersey and the New Jersey Institute for Schema Therapy. Wendy has co-authored chapters and articles on schema therapy and cognitive therapy. She's the author of Disarming the Narcissist, Surviving and Thriving with the Self-Absorbed. She has a specialty in treating narcissists and the people who live with and deal with them. And she lectures nationally and internationally to professionals on the subject of narcissism, relationships, and dealing with difficult people. Her private practice is primarily devoted to treating narcissists and partners and people dealing with them, and couples dealing with kind of narcissist and relationship problems. You have a really interesting niche in the market, and I am really grateful to be talking to you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Nate. It's great to be with you.
It's not often. I love talking to specialists because you've gone so deep on a specific issue, and narcissism is one of those things that you don't find narcissism experts very often. Seems like an interesting topic to kind of become obsessed with or devote your career to.
Indeed, or some would say masochistic.
A little masochistic, maybe. Yeah, you would be the judge of that. So
yeah, it's not surprising because working with narcissists, they are one of the most triggering populations you can deal with. So there's a lot of therapists that work with the people who are offended, the offended party. Who lives with and deals with a narcissist, but not too many who actually work with the narcissist because, again, they activate us, they trigger us, and it's uncomfortable. And it took a long time. I mean, I'm at this for 30 years, so a lot of time spent really learning how to keep myself sturdy and practice a good therapeutic approach. And you got to have leverage. We'll talk about that too, I guess.
Oh, yes, I'm excited to learn more. But I want to start at the very tippy top, just kind of as a general example. I feel like narcissism is one of those terms that gets kind of tossed around very liberally in society. People just use it to describe somebody who might be selfish or who might, I don't know, post too much on social media or talk too much about themselves. What is the difference between somebody who is a genuine or true narcissist, or maybe diagnosable with a narcissistic personality disorder, and somebody who's just being selfish or entitled or maybe dismissive?
Yeah, I mean, there is a clinical, diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. But to keep this kind of in just layman's terms, if you will, I write about this in my book. There are 13 traits pretty much that would characterize, I think of narcissism as happening along a spectrum. So everything from what you just described, which might be annoying, but not necessarily full-blown narcissistic personality, a spectrum. So from the more benign to the more severe. And on that severe end of the spectrum, you're finding someone who is, I mean, they're all pretty self-absorbed. So that's the unifying theme of narcissism, is a person who is highly self-absorbed. And when you go to moderate to extreme levels, they're self-absorbed, they're controlling. They could be very domineering, critical, demeaning, dismissive, unempathic, unremorseful, controlling. Did I say that already? And at the worst end, even abusive. So not all narcissists are violent and volatile, and not all violent and volatile people are narcissistic. There's different explanations for behaviors, but at the very severe end of the spectrum, you may find more of that aggression.
Gotcha. So what are some of the telltale signs that your partner might be a narcissist? Like, are there specific things? I mean, obviously we all probably, since it's on a kind of a gradient here, you kind of mentioned that it's not like very black and white. What are some of those signals that somebody might be more on the extreme end?
Yeah. Part of it, I used to say to some of my colleagues, you can diagnose narcissism from your gut. And I think for partners, that's also true. You start to feel at some point like you're invisible. You feel, as some of my clients would say, erased. That it's like what's happening in your world and in your skin is not being felt or reflected in your partner. You don't feel that sense of connection and attunement. You don't feel their interest and curiosity, but you especially don't receive the kind of empathic awareness or understanding of your feelings. They can, I mean, you get a sense of a partner who is just highly entitled. Make the rules, break the rules. I can have what I want when I want it. This is a very classic example for many partners who are dealing with narcissists, is you'll be invited to talk about something that's upsetting you. And I call this the bait and switch maneuver in my book, but you're invited to talk about something that's bothering you. And if it happens to be a stranger on the street, your narcissist might come swooping in like a superhero. But if it happens to be the narcissist, who is the perpetrator of your pain and your disappointment, look out, because they can't tolerate feeling like the bad guy. So you're living with a person who's highly entitled, often highly sensitive, experiences everything as a criticism or a lack of appreciation for all of their, wonderfulness. And you feel invisible.
Interesting. So it's like it's almost like they can do no wrong in their eyes.
Right.
Yeah, that seems like a very lonely way to live. I mean, how do people kind of get sucked into these relationships then? If I don't think people enjoy being in relationship with somebody who's selfish and it's all about them.
Right.
So what is it that enamors people with a narcissist out of the gate, or maybe might make them feel like they're a little bit, they're not seeing the narcissism in the actual meeting beginning?
That's a great question, and it's a difficult question for a lot of people to really ask, because what they end up asking is, "What's wrong with me?"
Or what did I miss?
Person, yeah. And you said lonely, and lonely is another really good observation, because most partners will say, "I feel so lonely in this relationship. It's as if I don't exist, I don't matter, I don't have preferences, opinions." So what attracts us? Narcissists are incredibly charming too. So let's not forget, they're very good at getting what they want. They're good at courtship. They're good at performing and doing what they need to do to have what they want. That's not to say that there aren't narcissistic people who also can have, authentic heart and soul and vulnerability and love for their partner. They can, because in the model that I practice, which is schema therapy, we look at personality in different dimensions. So we say there's a narcissistic part of you, but there's also a part of you that at times, although it may be this much of the time, can be caring and thoughtful and empathic and present, but it's only this much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time you're in these narcissistic modes, and this is what's problematic for the relationship.
How do you tell the difference between that little sliver of time where they're being genuine and the time where they're just performing?
You can kind of feel it, when someone is being charming with you.
Yeah.
You can feel almost the entertainment of that. It's interesting. It's highly complimentary. It's not intimate, though. It's not vulnerable. It's not, I can see you're struggling, or, I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, or, gee, that must have been hard for you. It's not that kind of response. It's not the, you mean so much to me, but sometimes I can't imagine my life without you. It's more the, God, you look great today. It's much more focused on appearance, and it's also focused on your performance as a partner.
Yeah. So do narcissists have a hard time kind of going deep with emotional connection then?
Yes, they have a very, very hard time going deep with emotional connection. They have a hard time feeling emotion. It's the hard work of therapy to drill in and really begin to activate emotion and look for that vulnerable part. It's there. It's buried so deep as part of what they learned a long time ago in their coping.
So do you find, I get a lot more complaints just doing what I do. Most often it's wives complaining about their husbands that are emotionally unavailable, emotionally unattached. They can't go deep. What's the difference between a man who maybe has never learned how to express his feelings, never really learned how to emote, never really learned how to connect on a deep level emotionally, and a narcissist who just like it isn't necessarily very capable of doing that.
Yeah, I think the real chief difference is that there is no remorse for that. There
Mm.
is no, it seems like there's no capacity. I say that very carefully because the capacity for empathy and emotion and remorse is
Exists.
there. It's just
Yeah.
buried, it's buried.
Like a robot.
Yeah, exactly. But the difference is that you're not going to get from the narcissist the kind, it's like you can wake up someone who's not narcissistic and say, hey, this pattern is hurting us. And with some help, you can begin to heal that. It doesn't take so long. With narcissism, it's a long journey because they're going to deny it. They'll I'm not that kind of person. I'm very autonomous. I don't feel things. It's ridiculous. What a waste of time. It doesn't make money. What's the value of all this touchy-feely, emotional, intimate stuff? And, it leaves partners just feeling kind of hopeless. And they're not remorseful for the impact of their behavior or lack of intimacy with
Yeah.
the partner.
Have you seen that that men and women narcissists kind of show up differently, or are they very similar in the characteristics and their behaviors?
They can be very similar, meaning that, there's a good diva who can give her male counterpart a run for his money. So
Yeah.
you'll see that, this, with the same criteria, the same level of arrogance and entitlement and pushiness and controlling. But what is much more interesting in distinguishing men from women when it comes to narcissism is the female narcissist tends to show up more like a martyr. So you get higher degree of emotionality, right? You get what I call the virtuous victims, the ones who are, oh, Nate, you think you're having a bad day? Let me tell you about my day. I'll tell you what pain is.
Right.
I'll tell you what dealing with a difficult partner is like. You have no idea. They're always in the most extraordinary pain and suffering. And it's not that they don't really have pain and suffering. It's just that this part is much more about, the need to be extraordinary, or it's vanity. Women will focus more on issues of vanity, issues on domestic prowess and their children and their children's success. So there's crossover for sure.
Mm.
You just see a higher degree of emotionality with female narcissists.
Interesting. Is it more common for men or for women to be narcissists, or is it just like kind of pretty neutral across the board?
And, the data has always suggested that 75% of narcissists are men compared to women. I don't know if that's still the case. I'm not sure. But, you could make the case that certainly with an emphasis on performance, achievement, competition, always being somewhat traditionally attached to male socialization, if it's overemphasized, if you're really missing the central ingredient of connection in early development, it would make sense that it would be higher among men.
Yeah, that does make sense. So is there like an ideal partner that a narcissist would pair with?
There's a great question. So what kind of partner selection do you see with narcissists? And, almost anyone. I'll say this for your audience because I know you have so many different types of people that listen, of different educational backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds. No one is immune to being captivated or caught under the spell of the narcissist. The narcissist, interestingly enough, will look for someone who either is going to make them look good, right? Because they can tick all the boxes on their criteria for the perfect partner. So they make them look good, and or they're looking for the partner who will just be really deferential to their demands. Having someone who's willing to applaud you and be your wonderful audience and give in to everything that you want is delightful, at least for a little while until they get bored, and then that's not fun anymore. But that's not unusual for them to either just look for the very, someone who's as solid as they are because it looks good having that person on their arm, or someone who is just also very self-sacrificing.
Yeah, it's all about reinforcing that image. So what happens when they do get bored? What happens when a narcissist is with somebody and maybe they stop getting that validation, or they just kind of get a little bored in the relationship? What's a typical behavior that you see of a narcissist in a situation like that?
They detach is what they'll do. And there's different ways they detach. Some of them are so focused on work that they're just really completely wedded to their workaholism.
Mm.
Cheating, not uncommon. Betrayal, trauma is very high among those who live with narcissists because the excessive preoccupation with sexual activity, whether it's online pornography or it's virtual chat rooms or it's prostitutes or it's pornography, it's affairs, whatever it might be. There is, and it's not surprising when you think about narcissism and what it means, that they'd gravitate to this perhaps more so even than another average person, because there's no give required of them. You don't have to give anything when you're watching porn or you're engaged in buying sex. So, it's a one-way street. And for the narcissist, that's just like Candyland, because they can go in for the rush at their own convenience and get excessively preoccupied with that because it feels good and it's distracting and it cuts them off from their real life painful issues. They carry pain. It's just they're really masters of masquerading under this narcissistic way of being. So really highly problematic in relationships is this issue of betrayal and breaches of trust, whether it's gambling or it's sex or it's drugs or...
And is there typically a lack of remorse associated with that?
Oh, yeah. A high lack of remorse. It takes, without professional help, it's pretty hard to restore trust in a relationship when this occurs, because the narcissist starts with denial, then goes into defending and blaming. So it's your fault that I ended up doing this. And eventually it's just, what's the big deal, and get over it. I've said I'm sorry. What the hell do you want from me? That kind of thing. And so it's very difficult to get them to be empathically involved in your experience when you've been offended in this way.
This is scary a little.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there are people who are listening right now and who are hearing their life parroted back to them, or people who who are in a situation where it's like, oh my gosh, this could be me, or this is me. What do I do? And I think one of the big questions that I want to tackle is it possible to be in a deeply fulfilling relationship with a narcissist? Is that even possible, or is it always going to be a competition for again with you against their own self-interest, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is, it is possible. It doesn't happen often that the narcissist can really heal in ways that will enable them to learn new ways of being in relationship. What that means really is just revealing themselves in a more authentic way, being more vulnerable, being more present. It is doable. I've witnessed it. I've done it. I've worked with people. It's incredibly rewarding to watch that process unfold. It's very hard to get there. It takes a long time. Many can't stay the course. And you've got to have that leverage in order for it to work. So for anyone listening, I always say to anyone who asks me for a consultation on this, do you have leverage? Do you have consequences that are meaningful enough for your narcissistic partner to take this seriously and to get the help that's necessary? There has to be the stakes have to be high for them to even step into therapy, usually, unless they're, again, on the milder end of the spectrum. And then to have a therapist who's sturdy enough, willing enough to work with them, and keen enough to catch on, and a therapist who is, and I'd say this to everyone listening, make sure the therapist wants to hear from you.
Yeah.
Because if they're not interested in hearing from you, this could be an enormous loss of time and energy and become a little more perilous, in fact. So it's possible, but leverage has to be high. Therapy has to be really with someone who understands these issues of narcissism with a good targeted therapeutic approach that can dig deep.
Yeah. So where do you, well, oh man, I have so many questions now. You talked a little bit about leverage, and you talked a little bit about therapy, and I want to address both of these topics a little bit more deeply. One, I think is important to point out, just with regards to finding a therapist, is that not all therapists are created equal.
Right.
Not all therapists have the same training. Not all of them have the same background. They're just people with their own issues as well, who do have training to help others. But if you're in a unique situation and you're looking for a therapist and you find somebody who doesn't have the training to work with therapists, what are the ways that it might backfire or may not work out the way that you hoped?
Oh gosh, and it's sadly what happens most of the time, because your point is so critically important, the idea of being a good consumer of therapy. And it's amazing to me how many people feel unentitled to ask the therapist for a lot of information about their training and their treatment approach and their experience in working with complex personalities. They feel like they shouldn't ask the expert these questions. And I think you absolutely have the right to do that. It's your time and your money. And the reason why I think we have so much failure when working with narcissists is that therapists can get, swept away too, and can fall under the spell of the narcissist. They can be charmed, they can be fooled. And if they have a policy where they're not hearing from partners or family members, they're missing a big bunch of truths that needs to be addressed and confronted. Or the therapist sees it very clearly, but they haven't done enough work on their own personal issues to be able to sturdy their spine in the chair and confront the narcissist in the ways that they need to be confronted. So you can set limits and you can hold them accountable and you can persist at getting them to take the wall down so you can look at what's behind it that keeps them so stuck in their narcissistic modes. You keep the leverage very high, keep reminding them of what's at stake. And this is just, without this, it's really not so easy or even possible to be able to begin to heal narcissism.
So what are some good questions that you should be asking a therapist if you're looking for a good one to help deal with a narcissistic partner? And what responses should you be looking for?
Yeah. What you want to ask them very plainly, do you work with people who have narcissistic personalities? And that means anything along the spectrum of narcissism, depending upon your partner. And you can say, I think my partner might be on that spectrum, and I'm concerned. Do you have experience doing this? Can you tell me a little bit about that? Can you tell me what your treatment approach looks like? How involved do you have the partner in this process when you're working with, say, my husband? Will I be involved in this process? Will you want information from me? Will you want to assess me as well to see if there's something that's getting activated in me that's prohibiting me from being a good ally in this treatment process? These are all questions that you'd want to hear affirmative answers to, Otherwise, I just think it, as I said, it becomes, it could just become a big waste of time.
Totally. And you don't want to waste your time or your money.
Right.
You mentioned sturdying yourself and leverage.
Yeah.
I want to get a little bit more into that. I find that sturdying yourself seems a little bit like it paints a mental image for me of like having a backbone, and a backbone that's really grounded, having a sense of like reassurance that, if some storm comes your way, you're not going to get blown over. So that's the image that's getting painted in my mind. I'd love to hear more from your perspective, what it means to sturdy yourself, maybe as a partner as a person whose partner might be a narcissist or have these narcissistic tendencies. What does it mean, or what does it look like to sturdy yourself?
I'll give you a couple examples of that. So sturdying yourself means that when you are addressing the narcissist, when you are confronting them, when you're trying to set limits or even just get them to be able to hear your experience or your need, you can't be doing that from your 5-year-old self. Yeah. So we all get thrown, right? That's the word. We end up in these time warped spaces because that's how memory works. So when I go back to remembering my first early years working with narcissists, I was triggered. And what I discovered is that, there were moments where I was just caving in. I was giving in to demands. I was ignoring these critical, awfully disrespectful comments. I was just avoiding it, giving into it, defending myself, apologizing for things. And partners can recognize these behaviors in themselves. You get thrown, or you just get angry. And then just getting angry, you've just extended your hand to do the dance again, right? You're back in the dance, and the narcissist is very comfortable there because they're highly competitive and they know how this plays out, and they know how to walk away and slam the door, and they know how to get the last word in and make you feel lower than low. So we need to take a good look at our own personal narrative, our own personal story, and say, what is it in this story, in my own life themes? Aside from just being a human who reacts the way we react to people when they're mean to us. But what else is in my story that disallows me from remembering that I'm a bright, competent, sturdy adult? And I don't have to tolerate this. And not that I don't want to be roaring either, like an angry
Right.
lion, because that misses the whole message too. I want to be able to deliver my message at this pitch right here. I want to be able to say, as I do in the treatment room, look, Joe, you may not be saying that to hurt my feelings, okay? And if I weren't trained to understand you, that would be kind of ouchy. But so I'm saying it might not be your fault or your intention, but I got to tell you, the impact, like, wow, that's pretty ouchy, and that's not okay. And that's why you're in trouble. So as a therapist, this is my direction. As a partner, same thing. I mean, you can start with a preemptive strike, because the narcissist is always watching for, you're going to make me the bad guy. You're going to make me the bad guy. I'm going to be the bad guy in your eyes, and I can't tolerate being the bad guy. So as a partner, you want to preempt any address, as tedious as this might seem, with, this isn't meant to make you the bad guy, honey. I know you're working hard. I know you're tired. I know you haven't been feeling well, but you can't talk to me from that tone, because I can't hear it. Number one, it's just upsetting. It's off-putting, and it really makes me feel more distant from you. And they may just harumph and roll their eyes, but you know what? You've dropped the little seeds in the soil. You're not doing the same dance anymore. You can't do that, though, if you're not sturdy. So you've got to get your little self, you close your eyes, you take some breaths, and you get your little vulnerable you out of the room. Tuck that part into a safe little place and feel your feet on the ground. Look at yourself. Take a deep breath. I'm an adult. I'm not stupid. I'm a smart person, and I have rights, and I have ideas, and they matter, and I matter. And so here we go. And now you assert yourself.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that the ideal partner in many cases, for a narcissist is somebody who's a pleaser, somebody who's a little bit more passive. And so it sounds like this approach is going to require people to stand up and maybe confront an aspect of themselves that they've never confronted before. This is definitely an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
My gut tells me that if you have years and years built up of being kind of the pleaser and being the more passive person who will roll over and accommodate a narcissist, my gut tells me that if you stood up for yourself and became sturdy and rooted and said, hey, my thoughts matter, and this matters, and I matter, and these experiences that I'm having and emotions I'm having are valid, that your partner might be tempted or inclined to escalate their emotion to see if they can kind of suck you back into old habits and old patterns.
Absolutely. They will. That's why I always say this is not like a quick fix.
Yeah.
It's not magical. The hardest thing about confrontation is not what the other person's going to do, but how it's going to make us feel. So you can already anticipate what you just articulated, Nate. When you can anticipate that response from them and know that your tree stands strong and it doesn't sway and fall over, then you're ready to say, when you're calmer, we can come back and revisit this. I'm not going to revisit this. Okay. But just know that this is incredibly important to me. It's not your fault, honey. I know I've been dancing this dance with you for a long time, but I'm really tired and I need to matter too. And I think we need to get some help for this so that we don't inevitably just end up growing apart, because I'd like us to grow old together, but sometimes on some days like this, it doesn't look like we're going to make it. So you don't have to say, that's it, get help or I'm done with you. You can. Many people do. They sort of hit that,
breaking point.
But if you're not there yet and you're thinking, well, I don't have any leverage, I'm not there, you do have this. You're still telling the truth. You're talking about your wishes, your fears, your dreams, and the inevitable sadness that this could come apart. if it doesn't change. And you're taking responsibility, okay, I've done this dance with you for a long time. I'm the pleaser. I give in, I give up, I avoid. I'm not going to do that anymore. It's just not good for me. I need to matter too.
I love that you brought up the term responsibility. It's something I talk a lot about. And I know there are a lot of people who find themselves in situations like this where maybe they have a partner who's under functioning and they're over functioning, or maybe they have a partner who's selfish and a little self-absorbed and they're more of a fall on their sword, people pleaser type of person. And it's really easy to just say, there's nothing I can do about it. My partner's forcing me to be in this position. And I love that you're bringing into this an aspect of personal responsibility, that there are things that you can do. There are things that you can change. There are dances that you can refuse to participate in, and behaviors and patterns that you can refuse to tolerate. Right. And essentially create some really strong and sturdy boundaries to make sure that you don't get walked on anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important. It's not easy, So for those listening who have children, who have been threatened that, you just go ahead and try and leave and watch what happens to those kids, watch what happens to your beautiful house, it's not easy. It's not fun. It's sometimes dangerous divorcing a narcissist. So I've watched and helped people through that process as well. I understand that there's no easy solution, but we do always need to wake up every morning and recognize that I have choices. They may not be great choices
or fun ones.
Choices. I still have choices, and I can exercise the choice to be here and to speak with my authentic voice and deal with, as long as it's not violent. Of course, if it's violent and there's safety issues, that has to be the number one priority.
Absolutely.
But anything short of that, of course, it could be still uncomfortable and messy and ugly. You still want to be able to start speaking right through that storm, get your voice heard through that storm as much as possible. And not just for the sake of change, because change isn't going to come easily. It usually doesn't really come for an enduring period of time if you don't have therapy, but to hear yourself becoming a good advocate for you.
Yeah.
As you said, Nate, that's an amazing and wonderful part of personal growth and satisfaction is, okay, so, he's still marching off and slamming the door, but you know what? I like hearing me stand up for myself. Good for me.
I love that. And you mentioned that a lot of people who are in relationships with narcissists, they feel like they're lost. They feel like they disappear. Yeah. And I feel like when you start to honor your own experience and give yourself the opportunity to stick up for yourself, that you end up finding yourself. You're no longer lost. You're no longer invisible. You matter because you are giving yourself the respect of seeing yourself and validating your own emotions and experiences, regardless of what the outcome is with your partner. And I think that sounds like the first step to regaining your identity if you feel like you've lost it.
Yeah, that's really beautifully well said. Yeah, you do. Yeah. You've got something maybe you've never had before, which is, even if it's just you, but it's someone standing up for you and being that advocate for you and caring for you. And it's representing you in a way that's very honest and real. It's not dancing around, placating, subjugating yourself, allowing yourself to be controlled and shut down and lonely because the longings, the loneliness may persist. Grieving is necessary. These voids in relationships with narcissists are great. They're very real. And there is deprivation. Certain needs are just not being adequately met when you're in a relationship with a narcissist. And you're entitled to feel your grief and feel your sadness and be your best advocate and turn your attention to something else that is pleasing for you, that works for you and keeps you healthy.
I love that. Beautifully said. Now, one of the things that you mentioned earlier on and then have kind of brought up a couple of times in this conversation is the word leverage. It sounds to me like a narcissist is unlikely to change their behavior unless there is leverage in play, unless you have leverage to kind of give them a nudge or push them in a certain direction. Can you talk to me a little bit more about like what do you mean when you say the word leverage, and then give maybe another example or two of what that looks like?
Yeah, Narcissists don't respond as many of us do to incentives. If you do this, you'll get this. They don't necessarily, because they believe they can have whatever they want.
Right.
They'll get it, they'll take it, they'll figure it out. So incentives don't work so well. But leverage does, because it means losing something. It means, in their eyes, failing. And failure is just prohibitive for the narcissist. So leverage means consequences that are meaningful enough where the narcissist doesn't want to have to face them. And it could be losing you as a partner, right? They can't bear the thought of losing you as a partner. And many partners will say, I don't know why you would be afraid to lose me. It's like I'm not even here. I'll say, yeah, well, but you know what? You're probably the best thing that ever happened to him. In many ways, you're meeting needs without even realizing it. You're just getting nothing in return. So they don't want to lose their partner. They don't want to lose access to their children. They don't want to lose their money. They don't want to lose their driver's license. They don't want to lose their jobs. It's consequences where they're mandated often, like, oh, happy day for the therapist when they come in involuntarily. But they come in because they don't want to face the consequence of not coming into therapy.
Right. How have you seen people use leverage productively to incentivize? What's to incentivize the right kind of behavior? And I'm kind of looking like, is there a difference between using leverage and an ultimatum?
Yeah, I mean, ultimatums sometimes, there certainly are ultimatums. Leverage includes ultimatums like your job is gone if you don't go to therapy. You have no job, right? Or you have no driver's license forevermore. It could also be, we have no marriage. I mean, if you really hit the brink,
right,
where you're saying this marriage is really over if you don't get some help. You've got to get some help, or I'm done. I'm really done with this. That's pretty high leverage. That's ultimatum, right? That's an either or, right?
What are some smaller examples of consequences or leverage that you could use to kind of incentivize your partner to behave a certain way? Because I know one of the scariest things about starting to have these types of conversations is you can't offer up a consequence and then not follow through. Otherwise, your partner will learn like, oh, well, this is just like an empty threat and I can still get away with stuff. So you have to put something on the line that you're actually willing to follow through on, which means it probably is not going to be day one, our marriage is on the line. So what are some of like the baby steps that lead up to that ultimatum that could be used to influence somebody's behavior before they get to that ultimatum place?
It has to be meaningful. So if it's too small, it won't be meaningful to them. Even if you really are at that place where you've had it and you're about to cross the threshold to talk to divorce lawyers, but you want to give it one more chance, even then, when you're serious and ready to enforce it, they may still try to talk you out of it. I mean, the narcissist will do anything they can to not have to face that consequence. But there are still smaller and meaningful consequences, like anticipating a future. As I was saying earlier, you can begin to talk to them.
Plant the seed.
Yeah, it's saying something like, I really meant it when I said, for better and for worse, until death us do part. I would love to grow old with you. I'd love for us to have a shared life, but not like this. And all I can see I'm not saying I'm going to leave. I really want to work at this. As soon as the narcissist, they're always listening for bottom line. Like, what's the bottom line? Cut to the chase. Are we done? Are you threatening me? So when you say, I don't want it to be over, but I do see, when I look out there into the future, I kind of see the paths going like this. And that makes me very sad, because I don't want that, but I see it coming. And then, okay, you don't even have to say anything about therapy now. That might just be a conversation or a mantra that you're going to introduce every 3 or 4 days until you're ready to say, oh, you know what, really, got to consider getting some help, because I can't feel close to you under this condition. And I feel like, and they'll be watching. I mean, they'll be watching, because narcissists is always watching for losses, and they're all about winning and righteousness and keeping their world stable by their decision and their word. So they're watching for any change in the foundation, any instability, anything that might look like you're distancing or separating yourself. They're noticing, even though many of you may be sitting there thinking, my narcissist doesn't notice anything. They're noticing. They'll notice if there's a shift in that pattern between the two of you. Unless, this is the big unless they're already plotting their own exit, and they don't plot their exit unless they've got an entourage of fans and followers, or they already have somebody waiting in the wings. Because narcissists at the heart of themselves are very lonely humans.
Interesting. It's interesting that underneath all of this charisma and all of this seeking for, I don't know, to control their appearance and their identity and pleasure and satisfaction and fulfillment, that underneath that is just pain.
Oh, yeah. Very lonely. And we call it the lonely, shamed child. There's so much insecurity under all the bluster. And it is hard to imagine, because they can show up very, I'm fine. I'm fine. And, I often look at them and say things like, if you really knew you were fine, you wouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But clearly,
you can see behind the mask a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, there's a lot of insecurity. There's a lot of loneliness. And I don't say that to make people feel sorry for them. I say that because the more you can understand how narcissism happens, the less you personalize this. The less you're blaming yourself for these behaviors that they are presenting.
Oh, it's just like any other mental health issue.
Yeah.
Like, I have a wife who struggles periodically with anxiety. And when I notice that she's getting anxious, I'm getting to that point where now I can see, like, oh, this is anxious Angeline. This isn't normal Angeline. And I don't need to take this on. And I can kind of breathe into it. And I guess when you can identify the patterns and the kind of the things that come along with the issue, you can depersonalize it a little bit and create a space between a behavior and what it actually says about you as a human being.
Yeah, that's a great example. I'm so glad you shared that. And, in a healthy relationship, because what is a healthy relationship, right? Well, I guess, you know this from your work and your interview with the Gottmans, right? A healthy relationship is going to have a 5-to-1 ratio of good to bad experiences. When you're living with a narcissist, though, your ratio is pretty poor when it comes to good bad experiences. So, you've got that storm coming at you so much of the time, whether it's overt aggression or anger, controlling, criticisms, demeaning, dismissive behavior, or they're highly detached and they're sort of living in the cocoon on the other side of the house, ignoring you, or just sitting in your presence but not even noticing that you breathe. And that's so painful, that you start to question yourself, because, when they're out there in the community, oh my God, everybody loves my husband. He's engaging and charming and funny and the best storyteller, and he's so generous with the community, and he gives money. He's a philanthropist, and it must be me. It's gotta be me.
Almost a sense of gaslighting, it feels like.
Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I feel like you've given people a lot of incredibly useful information here. And just to recap, like, we've talked a little bit about the signs of a narcissist. We've talked about how to identify one. We've talked about being sturdy. We've talked about leverage. We've talked about, being able to hold on to yourself inside that storm, even though they might be getting all the validation and everything that they need from everybody else. Like, it can be scary being in that relationship, and you might start to doubt yourself, but like learning to hold on to yourself. Is there any other advice that you would give to people before we kind of end this conversation? I'm also going to give you an opportunity to tell people where to find you as well. But before we do that, just any last piece of advice or words of wisdom from somebody who's spent decades working with these people that might help somebody who's a partner of a narcissist to be a little bit more successful and find a little bit more fulfillment and not lose themselves as much?
Yeah, learn as much as you can about narcissism, and, read, I'm going to say selectively. There's just so much out there in the literature that demonizes the narcissist. And while that can feel really good for a few moments, it doesn't really capture it.
It's not helpful either.
Not helpful. It just makes you angry, and anger makes you exhausted after a while.
Yeah.
So, learn as much.
And when you villainize somebody, there's always has to be a victim. And so I feel like if you're just painting the narcissist as the villain, then you're automatically stepping into the victim role, and that's not going to give you any power.
Yeah.
So, sorry, continue.
beautiful strategies that we use in schema therapy, and ones that I've elaborated with narcissists that you can use at home. We use them in the treatment room, but it's tedious, and people will say, oh, so many words I have to come up with. But it's an experiment. Call it your laboratory experiment and see if you can get any measurable results. But you start with things like, look, honey, it's not your fault. You were, I know you learned this from your own father. This is a bit of a mimicry of what you've learned. So it's not your fault, but it's got to stop.
So there's a sense of empathy.
There's a sense of empathy, but accountability. And you really can get accountability much better when you offer empathy. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is not compassion. Empathy is understanding. So we've got to differentiate those. It's just saying, look, I get it. You're upset, but
it's not okay.
Me, remember the person you love. So can we do this differently? Can we start over?
I love it.
Yeah. So empathic confrontation. This is a strategy that can be very useful when you're addressing a narcissist.
And I would imagine you have plenty of resources to help people gain those tools and kind of guide them through this process. So this feels like a perfect segue for you to kind of tell people where they can find more, whether it's your book or your website. Plug away.
If you go to my website, just type my name in, Wendy Behary, and you'll get my website, which is disarmingthenarcissist.com. There's a lot of goodies there. I've got podcasts. I've got my book. I've got a support group that's online that people can join if you want to be a part of a community of others who are struggling with this issue. There's just a lot of goodies there, reading materials, etc. So you'll find it all on my website.
Wonderful. And I will link to that down in the description and on my website as well, so people can find it easily. Thanks. Wendy, thank you so much for spending this time with us and kind of giving us this. I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there about this topic, and there's a lot of questions out there about this topic, and you have pulled back the curtain very beautifully and very articulately, given people not only the principles and kind of the background knowledge, but I feel like we're walking away with some really actionable, tactical things that people can do that might be in a situation where they're dealing with a narcissist and things are not going well. So thank you for being both a great teacher and a great tactician. This was a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thanks, Nate. So nice to be with you. I appreciate all of your questions and your beautiful flow with the interview.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Hey, really quick before you go, I want to tell you about something that I'm really, really excited about. So my good friend Laura Heck, who is a marriage and family therapist and a certified Gottman therapist, we get together every couple of months and we put on this amazing workshop called The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. It's based on Dr. John Gottman's research. It's amazingly powerful, and it's designed to give you all the tools and resources and principles that you need to take your marriage from wherever it is to the next level. It's amazing. And a lot of people ask me, like, who should go to this workshop? And here is my answer to that. This workshop is just like a tune-up for your marriage. So just like you get the oil changed in your car regularly, and you probably take it in for a tune-up every so often, or just like you go get a physical if you care about your body, you should probably come to a 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work workshop every so often just to get a tune-up on your marriage. We'll help you have some conversations about where your marriage is at, like what's going really well, maybe expose some things that could use a little bit of work, and then give you the tools and principles that you need to do the work to make your marriage even stronger and even better. I want you to come visit us and come do this workshop with us. It would be amazing to have you there. Go to utahdatenight.com to figure out where the next event is going to be held. Some of them are digital, so you can attend from anywhere in the world and when it's going to be held, and we'd love to have you attend and be there with us. It's probably the only way that you get to work with me and Laura in a really close way together at the same time, other than the Epic Wives experiment. And this is a great addition to that if you've already participated in that as well. All right, guys, hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope I get to see you at a 7 Principles event very soon.